Erupts in several parts of Mali, including in Kidal, where Tuareg rebels clashed with government forces. A passing grade. EU observers say this weekend's parliamentary vote in Guinea was calm but far from perfect. Our reporter on the ground brings us more. And Cameroonians vote in parliamentary and local elections. Observers say President Biya's party is more than likely to keep its comfortable lead. A fragile peace in Mali. Disgruntled army officers protested in a garrison town close to the capital, Bamako, after not receiving promotions they had been promised. Meanwhile, troops clashed with MNLA Tuareg rebels for a second day in the northern town of Kidal. Once a stronghold of the separatists that claimed independence from Mali's north, the town is now secured by a UN peacekeeping force. Clovis Kazali reports.
United Nations troops patrolling the streets of Kidal. On Sunday evening, as well as the following morning, there were clashes with the Tuareg rebel movement MNLA. A France 24 observer on the ground witnessed the violence.
MNLA fighters wanted to form a barricade near the bank. The army refused to let it happen, so there was fighting.
Streets were largely empty. Many residents hid in their homes.
We're scared the fighting could start up again.
Peace talks between the MNLA and the government broke down last week. The rebels blame Bamako.
Well, since he's been elected, President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta has said he will definitely not grant autonomy or independence to this region in the north. The MNLA said, either you give us autonomy and everything will be okay, or you do not, and we take up arms again.
The clashes in Kidal came after an attack in Timbuktu on Saturday. Suicide car bombers armed with more than a ton of explosives killed 2 civilians and wounded 7 others. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb claimed responsibility for the attack.
Guineans went to the polls this weekend to vote in a legislative election that was pushed back repeatedly over the last 3 years. With voter turnout at 80%, counting is still underway. Official results aren't expected before Wednesday. Observers from the European Union say the elections went smoothly despite organizational problems and flawed voting lists. France 24's Katerina Vitozzi reports from Conakry.
In this booklet are the preliminary findings of the European Union's electoral observation mission here in Guinea. In it, the mission chief Christian Preda praises the enthusiasm and calm with which Guineans voted in parliamentary elections on Saturday. He also notes that certain irregularities with regards to the voting process in the polling stations weren't enough to detract from the mainly transparent way that the vote was carried out. After a press conference here in Conakry, I asked him what his message was now that the Ghanaians had spoken for the political classes.
People want to put an end to the transition, to the political transition of this country, a very long one. And we cannot conceive an end of this political transition without the political elites. The people was in the polling stations. It was a very good atmosphere in these polling stations. Now it's up to the political elites to assume their responsibility and to put an end to the transition in Guinea.
Now, the sentiment there was similar to the message made by the EU observation mission after the presidential poll in 2010. At that point, it wasn't enough to diffuse the violent disputes that followed that poll. Remains to be seen if it will have any impact here.
5.4 million Cameroonians were called to the polls Monday. 180 parliament seats are up for grabs, as are thousands of town councillors. President Paul Biya's Cameroonian People's Democratic Movement currently controls the National Assembly as well as most local seats, and analysts say that situation is set to continue. As for the fragmented opposition, it hopes to retain its small foothold. In the aftermath of last week's attack in Nairobi, Kenyan security forces are investigating how the deadly siege was carried out. Intelligence reports show Somalia's al-Shabaab had warned it would strike. But Kenya isn't the only country the Islamist groups is targeting. Nicolas Germain reports on the other countries in the region that have been the object of al-Shabaab attacks or are afraid they might be in the future.
Under tight security, Kenyan members of parliament visited the shopping mall where at least 67 people were killed. They are launching an investigation because intelligence services allegedly had received warning of an impending strike.
We want to promise you that as parliament, we will investigate, establish, and see whether the people who are directly in charge of our security slept on their jobs.
Al-Shabaab said the attack was retribution for the presence of the Kenyan army in Somalia. It has also threatened the other regional countries who have troops there, namely Burundi, Uganda and Ethiopia. Uganda was already hit by Al-Shabaab 3 years ago in attacks that left 76 people dead. After the killings in Nairobi, Uganda said it had stepped up security.
The increased patrols of all the roads, all the city premises, and all places where there are temporary and permanent crowds.
Ethiopia withdrew its troops from Somalia in 2009 before sending them back again 2 years later. The government says the threat of attacks in Ethiopia needs to be taken seriously. But the opposition protested on Sunday, accusing the country's anti-terrorism legislation of being vague and used to stifle peaceful dissent.
As tensions remain high in the Central African Republic, France has said it's prepared to send several hundred more soldiers to the country. The former colonial power has had a virtually uninterrupted military presence there since independence. 1,400 African troops are also stationed in Bangui, the capital. Our reporters on the ground took a closer look at the role of French troops in the country.
Bangui's airport is the main entry point for the Central African Republic. It's a strategic area protected by the French army.
Go right, sir, until the stop sign.
At the entrance checkpoint, the French soldiers search for weapons. At the end of August, they were overwhelmed when these runways were swamped by thousands of people for 2 days. They were fleeing militiamen and asked the French troops to protect them.
You can't secure the airport when you have several thousand residents who are seeking refuge. You can't just stop them from coming in.
There are currently 400 French soldiers stationed at the airport. After deadly clashes in the northwest of the country this month, they are on high alert.
You have ethnic and religious tensions in the country. It could also happen here in Bangui. If that happens, the French army might support the regional African force here, but I hope we don't get to that point.
The regional African force FOMAC has 2,000 troops in the country and is set to increase. The French army has no immediate plan to reinforce its contingent, but said several options were on the table if the situation worsened.
He's been hiding from the public eye for months. Abdelaziz Bouteflika presided over a cabinet meeting Sunday for the first time this year, according to Algerian media. The ailing 76-year-old has been in power since 1999. He reshuffled the cabinet earlier this month, fueling speculation Bouteflika would seek re-election in 2014. Algeria's president returned to the country in July after close to 3 months in France, where he was hospitalized for a stroke. And that's it for this edition of Africa News. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks very much, Shona. And do stay with us here in Live from Paris. Mark Owen is with you next. He'll be keeping a close eye on what's going on in Washington. The government there now just hours away from the first shutdown in 17 years. He'll talk about what it means for the US economy, but also for the rest of the world. Don't miss that. That's coming up next.